Good evening and good to have you with us in this edition of the Urban Debate. You don't need me to tell you this, but I shall reiterate it. India is witnessing a massive crisis in the healthcare sector today. Our healthcare infrastructure, which wasn't the best any which ways, is now in shambles as India grapples with the second COVID wave. From medical oxygen for critical patients to beds and ventilators, we are struggling in the biggest of the cities across the states and other towns. The healthcare the infrastructure has gone into a tailspin. There is an acute medical oxygen shortage, at least in the 12 states, the 12 worst hit states. The shortage of ICUs and ventilator beds in many of the cities. States, as they look at these rising COVID numbers, are demanding more and more vaccine doses from the center and are not getting what they want. Healthcare workers are exhausted. They are overburdened. They are the core of our battle, the key to our battle against COVID, and they have been at it now for over 13 months. The testing has increased now in several cities as states realize the gravity of the situation, but that also means that our testing labs are overburdened. They're taking on more and more samples. Effectively, that is delaying the results of these tests as well. So tonight, for the next 1 hour, we are going to focus on what India needs on urgent basis, on the critical life-saving aspects of this battle against COVID. Life-saving medical oxygen. For any serious case of COVID, the first thing that is required is oxygen support. And we are now staring at a massive challenge there. ICU beds. You can always increase the number of beds very quickly, but not the critical care one. Ventilator beds. Again, you can always increase the number of regular hospital beds. The challenge is to ensure that the ventilator support is there for as many people as we need right now. If you don't have enough ICU beds or ventilator beds or oxygen, you will see and you will lose more lives to COVID. And you will see a dramatic increase in deaths. Remdesivir drug. At one point, we were manufacturing a lot of it. For some reason, we thought the crisis is over, COVID is gone, and we cut down. Now, as we ramp up our production, every state, every city, every COVID-infected family is searching for remdesivir. Vaccine doses. A big tool to get out of this entire mess quickly is vaccination, and we need more and more of that. And most importantly, healthcare workers. You can add beds, you can bring in oxygen, you can bring in the ventilators. You still need people to save lives, and people who themselves get enough rest and are in a good shape. So we're going to talk about how do we deal with this, each and every life-saving infrastructure aspect. And I say good evening to the panelists who join us this evening. Dr. Harsh Mahajan, President for Nat Health, Founder and Chief Radiologist at Mahajan Imaging. Sujata Rao, former Health Secretary, joins us this evening. Dr. Sudarshan Ballard, Chairman for Manipal Hospitals and on the expert committee, member of the Karnataka Health Vision Group. Saket Tikku, member of the Oxygen Committee for the Department of Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, joins us this evening. Ashok Patel, founder and CEO of Max Ventilators, also with us, covering all of these aspects. But first up, let me go across to Sujata Rao. Ms. Rao, it's not a secret that, our healthcare is one of the most ignored aspects in our country. We talk about several other parts of development. We often forget healthcare. But one would have assumed that last year's COVID pandemic wave would have taught us some lessons. Would you say we have learned our lessons and acted enough in building what is required?
Well, at this moment when we are seeing funeral pyres and we are seeing patients being denied care, we are seeing so much of suffering, so much of suffering. At this moment, to go on a reflection trip seems a bit worsening our status of mind, largely because, yes, I do agree that we lost that little window that the virus gave us. If you remember, we started going downwards from October onwards. And we had a whole of October, November, December, January. And it was the public health experts, epidemiologists, who did warn to the best of their ability that we can't sit pretty. There will be a second wave. Of course, they may not have been able to estimate how bad, project how bad it would be, but they did say it would be a pretty bad second wave. And we ought to have used those 4 5 months to ramp up and ensure that at least the laggard states, like UP and Bihar, are better protected and better provisioned than it was before. I'm most worried about the northern states. I think Maharashtra, Karnataka will bundle along. They have the capacity, the capability, though I would like to add a rider that there is only that much any country would do. It's not possible to have an infinite amount of capacity in the country, but South is still better off. I'm worried about the UPs and the Bihars. Today, 28,000 people have got infected in UP, and that's extremely, extremely worrying. Bihar has hardly anything. It's an empty page. And how they're going to cope if it kind of spreads there is a worrying matter. You very well, Tanvi, beautifully outlined the key pillars on which treatment and saving lives, SOPs and protocols and action has to be taken. We are falling short on many of those parameters, whether it's oxygen, whether it is ventilators. Unfortunately, even the ventilators that were supplied by Government of India were found faulty. I know Andhra has returned them, Rajasthan has returned them. These were mistakes that should not have been made. These are critical equipment. And more importantly, the training of our doctors. Our MBBS doctors should have been trained on how to do the critical care management. So we've lost a window. Is it possible for us now to make it up by, the doctors, I believe, are just simply doing their best. This is one time you see both public and private sector working shoulder to shoulder. You remember that for a long time, even the non-COVID patients have been neglected. And this second wave has come when the hospitals were themselves full of the patients that had been neglected the previous year. Now, managing that and managing this new caseload, I just don't know how they're coping with it. But nevertheless, I think the scope for us to manage this emerging situation is getting restricted. We have to bring down and cramp down on people to take effective action. We cannot anymore allow the laissez-faire behavior among the people. We have to prevent the infection from spreading any further.
Absolutely right. And in the last few days, often we've been questioned and criticized for showing visuals, dark, depressing visuals, of course, morbid visuals from crematoriums and burial grounds and burning pyres. But I truly believe that nothing else has worked in the last couple of months for people to get the message that things are dire and they're going to probably get worse from here on before they get better. And which is why maybe now this kind of messaging and showing of the reality is required for people to understand. But let's break it down now and take it one by one. For example, oxygen, that's the biggest one that's been in news right now. Today, there was a central government meeting to discuss on how should we go about ensuring that, we boost our oxygen supply. Every state right now is scrambling, asking each other if more oxygen can be supplied to them. So that's the first thing that I actually want to talk about. And Saket, Tiku, maybe you can come in here. For our viewer to understand, in layman terms, how much are we able to produce and what is the need on a daily basis that we have?
Hi. You see, I would like to tell everyone that we have limitations we have a limited installed capacity. We don't have unlimited, the stock of oxygen. But having said that, at the moment we do have stocks. We are in a position to supply. We have in many states, oxygen to industry has been capped, and that is being diverted for medical use. But we also need to, as I said earlier, we have limitations with our installed capacity. Now we are eating into the industrial oxygen segment. The industries are going to be shut for some time. Many states have already put a cap on the use of industrial oxygen. So there's a shortage of oxygen, no doubt about it. But we are trying to make all efforts to get the oxygen to the to oxygen deficit states. The issue over here is there is a delay in in supplying oxygen to the oxygen deficit areas. Our stocks are lying in the eastern part of the country where we have big, these steel plants. So now the question is, how do we ferry and trunk large quantity of medical oxygen, which is in the eastern part of the country, to those oxygen deficit states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, even Madhya Pradesh. Cases are rising in UP too. The issue here is, the challenge is that liquid medical oxygen is being ferried in specialized cryogenic vessels, and we have limited number of those vessels. But there are other ways. We have now decided to convert liquid nitrogen tanks and argon tanks for medical use. A lot of out-of-box thinking is happening by whether it is the Maharashtra government or by GOI. A lot of efforts are being done in order to ensure uninterrupted supply of oxygen. At the moment, yes, there is a delay. We are trying to, we are trying to tide over this problem. But I would like to say one thing: use of oxygen needs to be rationalized. We have, again, I will repeat, we don't have unlimited resources or unlimited installed capacity. We have our limitations, and it has to be used responsibly. That's all I can say.
Right. It's very interesting that you've highlighted also the fact, of course, we need to rationalize and use what we have, our limited resources, carefully, but that there is stock that we have apart from what we are able to manufacture on a daily basis, and that stock now needs to be distributed in a targeted, well thought out, fast manner. Take it from places where it is to the places that need it in urgency and are in dire condition. Now, in fact, we were looking at some data, Dr. Ballal. In the month of August, which was perhaps when most of the states were witnessing their worst state of affairs, data suggests that 2.43% of the active cases needed oxygen support. But right now, if we look at what is being seen, is that 4.5%, almost double of that active cases are needing oxygen support. Now, is it because of the larger number of cases, because of the severity that people are facing right now, or that we are using it in more number of cases?
Thank you, Tanvi, for having me here. I think it's quite alarming that more and more people require oxygen. One thing that is very certain is there's been a huge tsunami of COVID cases in the last few weeks. It has doubled compared to the peak last year, and that is certainly some concern for all of us. The fact remains that even though the cases have doubled so far, the mortality has been less than what it was last time. But because of sheer numbers, it outweighs the case fatality rates because of the numbers, and we still have our ICUs full. I do not think the doctors who have learned a lot about care of COVID in the past wave would be using oxygen unnecessarily. So I do believe that probably there are more number of patients who are sicker because of the large number of patients who have come in with COVID, and hence the more requirement for oxygen. Be as it may, I think we still need to cut the link of transmission, first by COVID-appropriate behavior. Second is by very, very extensive, aggressive vaccination of all the people above the age of 18. And thirdly, I think it's very important that we test more, track them, isolate them, break this chain of transmission. And the immediate thing that we need to do is save lives, which means we have to preserve our hospital beds, which means we have to take care of more and more people at home, COVID care centers, outpatients, daycare centers, modified hotel rooms, and use the hospital beds and the ICUs only for the very, very sick. Otherwise, we will lose more lives because the capacity of the healthcare system will be overburdened very soon.
Fair enough. If I could just take forward this conversation for oxygen and go back to Saket Tiku, because Saket Tiku, you said we need to think out of the box, be innovative about how we gather up more supply. Could you give us some more examples? One, of course, what we're already doing is diverting some of the industrial requirement oxygen to for the medical purposes. What else can we look at? Would we need a larger shutdown of industries that do require oxygen in a bigger way?
Okay, let me reply to Dr. Satprasad. If I'm not mistaken, if I got his name correct.
Dr. Balal, yes.
Okay. When I said the use of oxygen needs to be rationalized, I'm not a doctor. I have no authority to say what flow rate oxygen has to be given to the patient. That is the job of the doctors. But what I'm trying to say here, we need to understand, as I said, we have, like in Maharashtra, total installed capacity is 1,200 tons per day. And we are crossed the 1,200 tons per day. Now, what are we doing? We are getting it from Chhattisgarh and from other areas, from South, from Karnataka, trying to bring it to Maharashtra. Similarly, Madhya Pradesh does not have a single liquid manufacturing oxygen unit of their, on their own. So they are dependent on the neighboring states. The point I'm trying to make here is last year also we carried this exercise of, where we said, please use oxygen responsibly. Does not mean that, what flow rate the patient has to be given. It meant, please do the oxygen audit. We found a lot of leakages in the pipelines, whether it's a government hospital or a private hospital, especially in big hospitals. And then we plugged those leaks and we helped in saving oxygen. So that was, I never meant to tell what flow rate, whether the high flow rate of oxygen has to be given to the patient, or what rate, that I do not know, and I will not comment on that. But collectively, please understand, as I said, like in the state of Maharashtra, in Maharashtra is using 1,200 tons, and the around 6.21 lakhs in Maharashtra are active cases. 6 lakhs, I think I'm not sure, but I think around 6 lakhs are there. And Kerala has got 64,000. 64,000 people are using less than 100 tons of oxygen per day. And when you see Madhya Pradesh and you see Gujarat is now consuming around 700, 800 tons of oxygen with 30, 40,000 people of, the active cases. We need to ensure, look at the other states where oxygen is being used. The use of oxygen is not high in those states. We need to learn from each other and see whether there's a way we can treat the patients without, with using the less number of oxygen, if it's possible.
Okay.
As I said, I'm not a doctor. It's for this fraternity to find ways whether we can do that. And
so how else can we get some? We for example, today in the central government's meeting, it was decided that we are going to import about 50,000 metric tons of oxygen, medical oxygen. We've also decided more hospitals who can set up their local plants and kind of be self-sufficient in a way with these PSA plants. Would that be a practical thing to go forward with right now? Because it seems it may not solve our immediate needs.
Okay. See, my immediate worry is the projections which I have been given by various states for 30th April. That figure is mind-boggling also. So my immediate worry is 30th April. Putting up these plants will take a few months.
Correct.
Okay. So we are doing out-of-box thinking also. We are trying, yes, we even thought of airlifting the oxygen. The Maharashtra government is trying. Even the GOI is looking into it. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't think it's doable to lift huge quantities of cryogenic liquid, in the airlift huge quantities of this liquid oxygen. I don't think that's doable. But anyway, The government is going to take a call on it in a couple of days. Then we'll be having discussions with the Air Force authorities and with the headquarters, and then we'll take a final call on it. We are also looking at the railways, requested the railways, whether we can put these trucks, these cryogenic vessels are mounted on the trucks, and we put this, the RoRo thing, roll on, roll off model.
Right.
We'll put them on the rakes. We are looking at a lot, because if the oxygen has to come from Haldia, from Rourkela, from Bhilai to say Maharashtra or to other parts of the country, so we are looking at all possible means.
Well,
But
in fact, to add to what you're saying, to illustrate that point, I think Maharashtra, as you would know, has been able to, lift up some of the surplus oxygen from steel plants of JSW in Dolvi, SAIL in Bhilai from Chhattisgarh, even bringing in some from the JSW plant in Bellary. Of course, the Reliance has also now diverted some of its oxygen from the Jamnagar factories towards Maharashtra as well. So those are the kind of things that individually the states are looking at. While centrally we decide on a larger policy to tackle this crisis, individually the states are also scrambling and seeing where they can get more. Madhya Pradesh has also dipped into the steel plant in Bhilai and gotten some supply from there. Now, if I may just go across to our other panelists as well on the.
I would like to make a point here, if
Mr. Nikku, if you will just allow me to come back to you, and I'll just bring in our other panelists as well. The other aspect, Ashok Patel, good evening to you, would be the critical life-saving instrument, the ventilator. Where again, if we look at the need that was there and the percentage of cases in August that were on ventilators versus now, it's dramatically gone up. And justifiably so, perhaps because the second wave has been worse, and we're seeing daily number now double of what we saw last time. Now, what is the situation as far as ventilators are concerned? How quickly can we match up to the needs?
No, actually, every city is running short of ventilators, because this particular virus is having a typical characteristic, typical behavior, that within 4 or 5 days' time, it starts damaging lungs. And before patient comes to know about infection, many times patient himself is not aware of the damage or the infection, and the lung starts damaging. And there is no option other than putting him on ventilator, because either he has to be put on ventilator, or prior to that he has to be put on oxygen therapy. But because of shortage of oxygen, patients, it takes time on getting treatment, and finally the patient lands up with putting himself on a ventilator. So number of patients on ventilator are increasing, are more in this case, second phase, and probably we don't have sufficient ventilators. I think we have less than 50% of the ventilators needed for the treatment.
Less than 50% of what is needed at the current pace, you're saying, Mr. Ashok. We don't even know from here on what the rise could be. At least the next 3-4 weeks are set to be extremely critical. What is the quick short-term solution we can look at? Would it be importing? Is there any faster basis of manufacturing, any makeshift kind of ventilators? What are our options right now?
I think presently we don't have any option, because oxygen, because once the lung starts damaging, then either the patient is treated with the pressurized oxygen. If oxygen is not available, then ventilator. There is no second option.
Sujata Rao, this honestly is actually as true and as real as it gets. There aren't options to ram this up quickly. You pointed out there were reports about ventilators that were made but didn't work from Andhra Pradesh. Rajasthan recently returned an entire large batch. Now, this to me is a nightmare, government nightmare as well. What do we do? Do we engage with other nations? What options should the policymakers now be looking at? Mr. Ashok, allow me to take this question across to Sujata Rao.
Tanvi, I doubt if I can offer any reasonable answer for you. It's going to be disappointing. As one doctor told me, ventilators are not cycle pumps that you just pump in air into somebody's lungs. They're sophisticated equipment. They need to be calibrated. The air pressures have to be maintained, and it's not a easy thing to manufacture. In fact, I'm told it should run for at least a year or two to really be good quality equipment. And so, you don't have, it's not a mask that you can just get some people to sit down and manufacture overnight. And as for importing, I'm afraid, well, if they can get some importing done, that will be, of course, a great relief. And I think maybe that's an option that government may be already exploring.
May I
and
ask you this question? And I'm not trying to make this political at all, but at the end of the day, it is a lot about how government, states, because it's also a state subject, and central governments handle this situation and prepare themselves. That's the job of policymakers. And the first round should have given us those warnings and taught us a lesson of what needs to be done. So I don't comprehend comments that come from central government and even the health minister when they say we are ready, we are well equipped. It's just that the surge is too much. Now, is there some amount of denial in our authorities, states or center?
I agree, Tanvi. Even in the first round, if you remember, ventilators was always an issue. We were never really ready. We didn't have that many critical care infrastructure in the country. The deficit areas were deficit, and we just thought we were very lucky that we got by in the deficit parts of the country, in the northern states. Now it's going to hit us, and hit us pretty badly. And I do have to admit that there has been some amount of oversight in this very critical infrastructure ramping up in the northern states. And I also suffer, but as I said, somehow we can manage and bundle along. But the northern states is something that's worrying me, because they don't have neither the capacity of equipment nor the skilled manpower. Where are they going to get the team to manage ventilators? That's my worry. So it is a bad scene, a very bad scene.
And up till 3 weeks ago, repeatedly every single day, Dr. Harsh Vardhan would tell us, we are ready. We are well equipped to handle the next wave. I understand people need to be assured to not panic, but I think there is a time when you need to press the panic button and admit what is going on and accordingly work. Nevertheless, the other aspect, and Dr. Harsh Mahajan, good evening to you, and thank you for patiently waiting till I came to this aspect. But the other obviously is the diagnostic, the testing, the tracking of this virus. The virus is constantly evolving. One day we all believed that RT-PCR was the final answer. Now, even in the case of Chief Minister Yediyurappa, it's turned out that, he tested negative one day and 2 days later he tested positive. Many doctors are advising to do more exhaustive CT scans and imaging tests. Again, infrastructure-wise, are we ready or how far away are we from what is needed?
Thank you for having me on the show. And the infrastructure, especially in diagnostics, really got ramped up during the first wave, when initially we were only capable of doing about 100 RT-PCR tests. And then we are today at 1.6 million. And maybe once the counting is done of the second wave, I'm sure will be much higher. This was because the public and the private came together. And in the beginning, it was ICMR, which was at the helm of affairs. And really, we worked shoulder to shoulder. And that's why this, the RT-PCR kits were manufactured within the country. So many new equipments were set up. And we reached this phenomenal figure of 1.6 million. Now, what happened during the lull in the storm? Somehow, the public, as well as the healthcare providers and the government somehow forgot that a first wave is always followed by a second wave, and the second wave is always going to be greater. And this is where we are. But the diagnostic industry, I can tell you, is working overtime. In some parts of the country where we are deficit, the time which ICMR mandates as 24 to 48 hours. And we are trying in some parts of the country to stick to the 24-hour mandate for turning around the reports. But there are other parts where we now hear it's going to 3 days and even higher, because the samples have to be collected, then they have to be transported, and only after that you're able to, give the report. Now, about your specific question about RT-PCR being negative, we do know that even though it's the gold standard test, there is a 30% false negativity that is associated with this test. I believe today, as we've learned and experienced over the last 1 year, most labs today would have about a 10% false negative rate. But even then, the incubation period of the virus is long. It varies from 2 to 14 days with an average of 5 days. And if the test is done too early, it may come negative. And that's why we say you must do a second test after 2 to 3 days in case the symptoms are of COVID. Clinically, you know that it's COVID, but RT-PCR is negative. The other situation is where a CT scan may play a role, but it's in a very limited set of patients. It is not to be overused, but many times a patient is very sick, RT-PCR is negative, that's where a CT scan can help, and you see the typical lesions of COVID, which tells you this is COVID, and 2 or 3 days down the line, when you repeat the RT-PCR, it comes positive. There are also cases where even the second RT-PCR test may come negative, but you're sure you're dealing with COVID, and that's where a CT scan plays a role. This may happen in 5 to 10% of cases, but it is, again, I would stress, it is not to be overused. Today we are getting calls where people are saying, I've got COVID, RT-PCR positive, do my CT scan. And here I would like to caution that if done early, we may be lulled into a false sense of security because the lesions have not appeared. They haven't reached the stage where, it is a moderate or a serious disease. CT scan should be done ideally between the 5th to 7th day after the symptoms start, unless the oxygen level goes down below 94%, which is when you can use it early. Then also, there is this narrative going around that RT-PCR is missing the new variants and the new mutants. Now, I would like to address that as well, because all the testing, the whole genome sequencing that has been done, where we have found the mutants, found the mutations, has been done on those samples which have been tested positive on RT-PCR. So it's a false narrative that it is being missed and that the mutants are being picked up only on whole genome sequencing. That is what whole genome sequencing is meant for, but the samples tested positive on RT-PCR and were then sent to CSIR for whole genome sequencing. And so that narrative also I want to put at rest. Finally, I think in this country, we need to do more of whole genome sequencing so that we are able to recognize the mutations early, we are able to pick up the mutant viruses early, and also we are able to see the patterns of spread within the country. The dual mutant virus, which has been found in Maharashtra, I'm sure it's gone to many other parts of the country. We have reports even from England and from Scotland where they found the double mutant virus. And so this is something which needs to be ramped up. And finally, I would say, let us use our facilities optimally. Let's not have mild patients crowding into hospitals. It is meant for those who have moderate or serious disease. Do not deprive them of the hospital beds, which are in short supply as it is. Get treated at home. There is telemedicine, which is very robust. There are many positives that have come out of this pandemic, and telemedicine is one of these. And so I would just suggest that let those beds be used for those who actually need them, especially the ICU and the ventilator
Oh,
beds.
yes, absolutely. And, you know, especially for those who can use a bit of push and influence and get a bed, they need to factor this in. I mean, for everybody else, I'm sure the doctors in the hospitals will just say, no, you don't need a bed, you can go. But it's a fine line, Dr. Bilal, when you tell people to take their symptoms seriously and see a doctor, to even, you know, to not take it for granted, even if your first RT-PCR is negative, and if you have symptoms, you must go to your doctor and not just go around assuming it's a common flu, then that is also going to add to the pressure at the hospitals. And that brings me to the other aspect before, you know, I bring in Tabassum, the other aspect about healthcare workers. And if, when you're looking at over 2 lakh cases every day, do we have the medical staff to deal with this?
Obviously, that's the $1 million question, Tanvi, because as it is, the healthcare workers have been stretched. And if you have to deal with hundreds of thousands of cases every day, that will certainly stretch it to a point of breaking. So hence, it's very, very important that we try to break the cycle, immunize as many people as possible, and treat as many patients as possible at home. We have technology, as Dr. Mahajan mentioned, where with the telemedicine and monitoring devices, you can monitor them at home. Try to treat as many people at home or COVID care centers or hotels that have been converted into a sort of step-down kind of hospital beds, and use the hospital beds only for the worst affected. Otherwise, you will not have enough health workers to take care of the people who are really sick, and you will be losing more lives. And already fatigue has set into the healthcare workers. We cannot stretch them any further. So I think we have to be very judicious, not only in breaking the cycle of transmission, mass immunization, trying to reach a level of herd immunity, but also make sure that we recommend more and more home care and out-of-hospital care and reserve the hospital and the ICU beds only to save lives.
I mean, and I just want to highlight this. I think there is no denying the fact that there is a massive shortage currently of critical care hospital beds with ventilators and oxygen support and ICU. Now, I think if we had made this a bigger issue of government accountability, maybe even a couple of weeks ago, it would have been fairer and justified. Now, with the kind of numbers we're looking at, for a lot of these states, there is nothing more that they can do. I mean, in Maharashtra, now for 3 straight weeks, every day we are registering 40,000, 50,000. Today, it's over 65,000 cases. Delhi is now looking at 20,000 cases every day. It is bound to collapse at this point. And no matter how many beds you add, you will still struggle. But Tabassum, for most of these states and even the center, was there a assumption in terms of work that was being done that COVID is gone? We don't need to prepare for it anymore. Is the coordinated effort to build again the healthcare infrastructure starting only now?
See, when the cases started declining somewhere around September, post-September, after the first wave, there were predictions for a second wave. But I believe what we saw during the period of January and February was that the preparations had completely stopped. There was a sense that we have reached an end of the first wave. The second wave will not affect the population, Indian population, as badly as the first wave. And a lot of preparations which could have actually gone into the infrastructure ramping up did not actually happen. For example, a lot of hospitals had announced last year that they're going to set up liquid oxygen plants, or at least storage tankers, huge capacity storage tankers for oxygen. But we are seeing this year in rural areas, civil hospitals have not yet installed those tankers. Aurangabad is one example. It has not established a tanker that it was supposed to. So there was a delay in preparations for at least 2 months. I believe the entire system thought that they're not going to be hit by a wave so huge and so steep that we suddenly saw cases rising from February, and there was very little time to actually prepare. In Mumbai, at least, the BMC had kept jumbo centers open and working. But the only problem that we are seeing now is a lot of ventilators are actually kept in hospitals, not just Mumbai, but across Maharashtra, in rural areas. And they do not have enough intensivists or specialists to treat patients on these ventilators. So we have ventilators. Some of them are not functioning. Some of them do not have expert doctors to take care. And that is why they are just lying vacant. We cannot admit a patient on it. So yes, there has been a little lax in the month of January and February. And I think we could have sort of picked up pace in February when we saw Amravati and Vidarbha region reporting a surge in cases.
And that's a classic example. And what is worse is the other state governments didn't even get the message or take the lessons from Maharashtra and the second wave that hit Maharashtra pretty much by mid-Feb. Numbers had begun to go up. And then Kerala. And while everybody lamented and questioned Maharashtra and Kerala, nobody thought it's going to happen to them and that they should start getting their oxygen supplies and ventilators and additional beds and reopen their makeshift ones that they had created earlier on time. That's where I feel that there was a massive loss of at least critical 6 weeks that could have still helped us in certain manner. If I can go back to Saket Tikku, Mr. Tikku, you wanted to make a point earlier about the preparation?
Yeah, see, I would like to say we need to find ways to put a check on the growth of this disease. If you compare today's active cases with yesterday's, you will find there has been a growth of 13%. People too have to behave responsibly. You can't go to Kumbh Ka Melas, you can't party hard and attend social functions. After 5 days, you're looking for a bed in the hospital, looking for oxygen, looking for other drugs. We too need to be, the people need to behave responsibly. We are finding, ways to get oxygen, make oxygen available to the people. Right now, I don't know whether you have noticed, I said we are getting oxygen from the steel plants. So industrial oxygen is being we are dipping into the industrial oxygen and trying to provide it for medical use. Now, this was a brilliant move made by DPIIT, Ministry of Commerce, on April 7, when it was a proactive measure taken and which is saving lives now. We decided, and over in the world, or maybe, it was done so swiftly that industrial oxygen was allowed for medical use. On 5th of April last year, we put up a proposal, AGMA put up a proposal to Additional Secretary DPIIT, and she in turn spoke to the health authorities and others, then CIM Piyush Goyal ji. He called for the meeting immediately. In 2 days flat, the law of the land was changed and we allowed industrial oxygen for medical use. We knew that when the situation like this will happen, we can go and dip into the stocks of the Steel Authority of India of their plants. So we are doing our best. The government is trying our best, but we also need to be a bit responsible. We have to find ways how to stop, put a check on the growth of this disease. We can't, as you rightly said, it will go out of the hands. It means it is going to put the entire system under the stress. So I would say we too need to behave responsibly. As I said,
well, maybe we can stop looking at conducting election rallies even now.
Of course, yes.
I don't understand
yes.
how that still continues. And I mean, it puzzles me every single day to see, more rallies are still continuing and the Kumbh Mela still continues. Every day now we're looking at 500 cases coming in from just Kumbh, which I think is a very conservative number and not perhaps even reflective of what the ground reality may be. The states from where these devotees have gone, those are the states who need to now start preparing on what happens when these people come back and if they're able to track them properly. But I hear you and I get your point that was a good decision and a timely decision in terms of diverting the industrial oxygen for medical purposes. On the other hand, there are states which are still busy covering up. There is an example that came actually from Madhya Pradesh where an official was actually sacked for admitting oxygen shortage. The states are going to those extents to not let this information out rather than telling us how are they going to resolve. So while Maharashtra is being open about it and saying, we do have a shortage, perhaps they are utilizing a lot more, but they are requesting the Prime Minister to get oxygen airlifted from other parts of the country and bring it to Maharashtra. They are seeking help from corporates on who can divert more oxygen. There are states like Madhya Pradesh who are actually sacking people for speaking up and admitting that there is a problem when it comes to shortage. Almost all private hospitals across the worsted states of Maharashtra, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, now Uttar Pradesh, Delhi are now looking and staring at a massive oxygen shortage. Tabassum, any insights that you can add when it comes to this dire situation that most hospitals are facing even in Maharashtra?
See, at least in urban areas, the issue is not that bad. But when you go to satellite towns, you go to rural areas, there is a massive oxygen shortage problem. Civil hospitals, smaller nursing homes are not getting supply. Now, the problem here is that smaller nursing homes have a very limited capacity of oxygen uptake. They initially used to require, say, 10 jumbo cylinders in 2 or 3 days. Now, those 10 jumbo cylinders are getting over in 5 to 6 hours. They do not have storage capacity. A lot of nursing homes you will find are storing jumbo centers, Dura cylinders outside on footpath at their main gates because they do not have space. They are waiting for everyday supply to come of oxygen. If there is one day there is no supply, they do not have oxygen to treat their patients. So none of these smaller hospitals or nursing homes were actually prepared to brace for such kind of surge and such kind of patient onslaught. The problem here right now is that you go to satellite areas of Badlapur, Kalyan, Nalasopara, Vasai Virar, you will find that hospitals are shifting patients on a daily basis because they do not have enough oxygen. The problem is more acute for ICU patients because they require more oxygen. They would require somewhere around 30 to 50 liters per minute, and they can exhaust an entire jumbo cylinder in, say, 40 minutes to 50 minutes. For these patients, there is no oxygen available. Smaller hospitals are forced to put them in another hospital. We are already seeing that there's a shortage of ICU, there's a shortage of ventilator across Maharashtra. So when we have oxygen in a particular hospital and they're forced to shift patients, which is happening on a daily basis, it really creates havoc for patients because they don't know what to do next.
Yes, absolutely. And actually there is no substitute to this right now either. And it's the fast pace of the consumption of oxygen that happens in that state that also needs to be highlighted because while we keep presenting news to our viewers of, oh, these many tents have been brought in or these many cylinders have been brought in, we also have to keep in mind that they're getting very consumed also very, very quickly. If I can just go back to Mr. Ashok Patel. Mr. Patel, there was a lot of conversations, a lot of discussions and decisions that were made on ramping up our ventilators availability when in the first phase. A lot of ideas were thrown around and experimented with. Can you give us any insights on what all of that actually worked? And now I'm not talking about the ambulators or the makeshift ones that we were trying to create. But in terms of India-made quick ventilators, did we get anywhere with what we discussed, say, last June, July? Mr. Patel, I think you're on mute. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Can you repeat the question because I am getting very poor sound quality?
Okay, I'm just asking you, last year when the first wave hit us, we spoke a lot about finding alternatives to manufacture ventilators very quickly. The Make in India ones, the makeshift ones. Did any of those ideas and options really work out?
Perhaps most of the ventilators invented or developed during that time are not seen in the market because they are mostly clinically not accepted by the hospitals. So I would say that government should put some regulations that ventilator, especially for COVID as well as for other applications, should be clinically acceptable to the hospital. Then only it can be put in the market. And overnight capacity or overnight, you cannot develop ventilator in a short time interval. I have seen multinationals struggling for years together to develop a ventilator which is patient friendly. So, but even though we as a manufacturer, we as well as few other manufacturers tried their best to put sizable numbers of ventilators in the market, probably, but I would say that initially it was anticipated that India would require something like 1.5 lakh ventilators, and probably the numbers which were procured were not enough. So only I think less than 50% of the quantity was procured from manufacturers. So I would say that India per ICU bed, we have very low number of ventilators in India as compared with hospitals in Europe as well as USA and other countries. So we should increase number of ventilators, and government should start helping manufacturers to modify their ventilators, which are patient friendly and clinically acceptable. Because ventilator manufacturer himself may not be aware of certain things, certain regulations, certain certifications. So I need on a government level, there are ERTL, EQDC, and other government laboratories who can help manufacturers to upgrade their products so that in this kind of emergencies, their ventilators can be made usable.
Well, I must admit that what you say here has shocked me a little when you say that, you know, ventilators that were made were not accepted by the hospitals because they were obviously not up to the standard. I mean, and this kind of a disconnect is really where there is a lapse in the entire process and the policy making. I mean, if the manufacturers are making something that the doctors don't find need for, it's been such a waste of effort and time. And we assume that we would be in a better off place today with all of these ventilators, but we are not. Thank you so much to all of the panelists who've joined us. It's been an extremely insightful conversation, a little depressing, of course, but unfortunately, that is what also the reality is in this second COVID wave. Our idea, viewers, is not just to say, oh, we didn't do anything in the last 1 year. I think a lot of that is pretty obvious. We did work a lot in the first wave. India handled it very well. We brought the numbers down, and then we perhaps got overconfident. We never went back to the war rooms and the drawing boards to see how we will improve our healthcare infrastructure for the long run, not just for one pandemic and one wave. But how can we pick up the lessons and experiences from here and ensure that this never, ever happens in our country again? And all states have failed here as much as the central government. States are also accountable in a large manner because healthcare is a state subject largely. And none of them learned this lesson from the first time around. We created temporary facilities everywhere. We got oxygen cylinders, ventilators, even staff on an ad hoc basis. And then we forgot all about it, assuming that this can never happen to us. For a country like ours, where our healthcare infrastructure is already in the pits, where the number of doctors per 10,000 people is 5, and beds is abysmal. We are the worst in the entire world. None of these states have bothered to ramp up their budgets and state annual budgets to say we will spend a little bit more money on healthcare. Maybe it's up to us to tell our netas now that this will become an election issue. It should be an election issue. It should be what we judge our governments on. Thousands of lives lost. We're looking at 1,000 people dying to COVID every day in our country now. How is it not the biggest political and policy point? Think about it. Thank you for joining us.